Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty army jokes for you today.
The new base commander is making his first inspection when he sees a soldier guarding a bench by the mess hall. The commander marches over. "Soldier," he barks, "why are you guarding this bench?" The soldier salutes the new base commander. "Sir, I don't know, sir," he answers. "The previous commander had ordered the bench to be guarded, so we guard it, sir. Following orders, sir. I think it's base tradition, sir." The base commander goes back to his headquarters and calls up the previous base commander. He asks why he has a soldier guarding this particular bench by the mess hall. "The previous commander always had a guard at that bench, so I kept that tradition." The new base commander finds 3 previous commanders, and they all give him the same answer. Finally, he reaches the original base commander, who is now a 99-year-old retired general, a veteran of World War II. "I'm now the commanding officer of the little base that you originally commanded 72 years ago. I found a man guarding a bench outside of the mess hall. Can you tell me something about this bench?" "What?" the old general says. "Is the paint still wet?" A United States Marine was deployed to Afghanistan, spending long stretches out on patrol, far from home. While he was there, his mail call finally brought him a letter from his girlfriend back home. Except it wasn't the kind of letter he was hoping for. It was a classic Dear John, and a brutal one at that. She explained in no uncertain terms that she had slept with 2 guys while he had been gone, and that she wanted to break things off for good. As if that weren't enough, she added insult to injury by asking him to mail back the photo of herself that she had given him before he shipped out. The Marine thought it over for a day or two, then did exactly what any squared-away Marine would do in his position. He made the rounds of his buddies in the unit and put out the call for any unwanted photos of women they had lying around. By the time he was done collecting, he had gathered more than 25 pictures of all kinds of women, some fully clothed, some very much not. He stuffed the whole pile into an envelope and mailed it off to his now ex-girlfriend, along with a short note that read, "I don't remember which one you are. Please remove your picture and send the rest back." A general was put in charge of supervising a fresh batch of recruits at boot camp, and he took the job seriously, running a tight and disciplined operation. One morning, while he was sitting in his office going through paperwork, a call came in with some sad news. Private Jenkins' mother had passed away the day before. The general turned to his right-hand man and told him to go fetch Jenkins so he could be informed gently and given the news in private. But the aide shook his head and reminded the general that this was boot camp. You couldn't go around being too kind to the recruits, or word would spread and discipline would slip. So instead, the general had the entire company of recruits fall in and line up in formation. He looked them over and barked out, "All of you with mothers, please step forward." As the recruits began to shuffle forward in unison, the general added, without missing a beat, "Not so fast, Jenkins." A young lieutenant was walking briskly across base one afternoon when a private passed him without saluting. Offended, the lieutenant called the man back sharply and laid down the punishment on the spot. "You did not salute me. For this, you will immediately salute 200 times." The poor private, resigned to his fate, had just raised his hand to begin when the general happened to come strolling by. "What's all this?" the general asked, eyeing the private about to start his marathon of salutes. The lieutenant straightened up and explained proudly, "This ignorant has failed to salute me, sir, and as punishment I am making him salute 200 times." The general nodded approvingly, a faint smile crossing his face. "Quite right," he said. "But do not forget, Lieutenant, that upon each and every one of those 200 salutes, you are required to salute him back in return." There were 3 hellions in one particular classroom, and they were so relentlessly bad that teacher after teacher had quit rather than deal with them. Finally, out of options, the principal made a bold decision. She hired a retired female Marine sergeant to take over the class and gave her full authority to do whatever it took to bring the 3 boys under control. On the very first day of the school year, the new teacher marched into the classroom and called the 3 troublemakers to step forward. Without hesitation, she slapped the first boy so hard it knocked him back 4 feet, then calmly instructed him to use the word "evidently" in a sentence. Rubbing his jaw, the boy managed, "Evidently, you've heard about us." "Excellent," she said, and moved on to the second boy, punching him square in the face and knocking him to the ground. Once he picked himself up, she gave him the same instructions. He thought for a moment and said, "Evidently, you want us to behave." "Excellent," she said again, and turned to the third boy, delivering a swift kick to his backside that lifted him clean off the floor and sent him flying across the room. Once he'd staggered back to his feet, she asked him for his sentence with "evidently" in it. Instead, the boy asked, "Teacher, can I ask a question first?" "Yes," she replied. "Are farts lumpy?" "No," she said, confused. "Well," the boy said, catching his breath, "evidently you just kicked the shit out of me." A U.S. Marine colonel was about to kick off the morning briefing with his staff. While everyone waited for the coffee machine to finish brewing, he decided to lighten the mood with a question for the room. "Last night, my wife was feeling a bit frisky, and it cost me a good night's sleep," the colonel began with a grin. "So I got to wondering, how much of making love do you think is work, and how much is pleasure?" A major spoke up first. "I'd say 75% work, 25% pleasure." A captain shook his head. "No, I think it's closer to 50-50. A lieutenant chimed in next. "I'd put it at 25% work, 75% pleasure, depending on how much I've had to drink beforehand." With no consensus forming, the colonel turned to the young private first class quietly manning the coffee machine in the corner. "What about you, Private? What's your take?" Without a beat of hesitation, the private answered, "Sir, it has to be 100% pleasure." Surprised, the colonel asked him why he was so certain. "Well, sir," the private said, "if there was any work involved in it at all, the officers would have me doing it for them." Airman Jones was assigned to the induction center, where his job was to walk new recruits through their government benefits, especially their GI insurance. It wasn't long before Captain Smith noticed something remarkable. Airman Jones had an almost unheard-of success rate, closing insurance sales with nearly every single recruit who came through his line. Curious, the captain decided to sit quietly in the back of the room one day and listen to Jones's pitch for himself. Jones walked the new recruits through the basics of GI insurance as usual, then delivered his closing line with the confidence of a seasoned salesman. "If you have GI insurance and you're killed in battle, the government pays out $200,000 to your beneficiaries. If you don't have GI insurance and you're killed in battle, the government only pays a maximum of $6,000. He paused, looked around the room, and finished with a smile. "Now, which group do you think they're going to send into battle first?" A crusty Navy Master Chief spotted a new face standing in formation with his unit and immediately barked the man over. "Get over here. What's your name, sailor?" "John. the new seaman replied nervously. "Look," the chief scowled, leaning in close. "I don't know what kind of bleeding heart pansy nonsense they're teaching you sailors in boot camp these days, but I don't call anyone by their first name. It breeds familiarity, and familiarity leads to a breakdown in authority. I refer to my sailors by their last names only: Smith, Jones, Baker, Jackson, whatever it happens to be, and you will refer to me as Master Chief." He fixed the young man with a hard, practiced glare. "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Master Chief," the sailor replied. "Good. Now that we've got that straight, what's your last name?" The seaman let out a long, resigned sigh. "Darling, Master Chief. My name is John Darling." The chief paused for only a second. "Okay, John, here's what I want you to do." After a grueling year-long deployment overseas, a soldier came home eager to reunite with his wife, and even more eager to share a secret he'd been saving up the whole time he was away. "So, honey," he said with a mischievous grin, "I found a way to make sure I stayed faithful the entire time I was gone, even surrounded by every kind of temptation. You are not going to believe what I trained my Willie to do." His wife raised an eyebrow. "Trained your Willie? What on earth are you talking about?" With a playful twinkle in his eye, the soldier unbuckled his belt and dropped his trousers to demonstrate. "Willie, 10 hut!" he barked. And sure enough, his manhood snapped to attention like a disciplined new recruit. His wife burst out laughing. "Willie, at ease!" he ordered next, and just as obediently, it relaxed back down. "Now you try it," he said, grinning. Still giggling at the absurdity of the whole thing, his wife gave the command herself. "Willie, 10 hut!" she declared, and to her astonishment, it snapped right back up. "Willie, at ease!" she ordered, but this time, nothing happened. It stayed stubbornly, defiantly at attention. Delighted and a little baffled, she decided the whole neighborhood needed to see this trick. She called over their lively 20-something neighbor from next door to witness it for herself. "You will not believe what my husband taught his Willie to do," the wife said excitedly. "It's hilarious." The neighbor, intrigued and more than a little skeptical, agreed to give it a try. "All right, let's see this. Willie, attention," she commanded confidently, and just like clockwork, it stood at attention once more. "Willie, at ease," she ordered, expecting the same result as before. But instead, it remained standing firm, refusing every command. Frustrated and more than a little embarrassed, the soldier finally gave up trying in front of an audience and stormed off to the bathroom, where his wife found him furiously trying to sort the situation out himself. "Honey, what on earth are you doing?" she asked, concerned. "He's not following my orders," the soldier grumbled, "so I'm giving him a dishonorable discharge."
A military soldier was granted 3 days' leave to go home and spend some quality time with his newlywed wife. But when he finally arrived, he discovered his wife was on her period, which put a pretty significant dent in his plans. Determined to salvage the situation, he did what came naturally to a career soldier. He sent an urgent message back to headquarters, requesting an extension of his leave, phrasing it in the coded military language he used every day on the job. The message read, "Omega 1, this is Omega 12. Danger from the field. Red in front. Leave extension requested. Do you read me? Red in front. Passage not clear. Extend leave." A reply came back almost immediately. "This is Omega 1. We read you loud and clear. The danger is minimal. Attack from the rear and resume immediately. Leave extension denied."
A former Marine Corps sergeant took a new job as a high school teacher after leaving the service. Just before the start of the school year, he injured his back and was fitted with a plaster cast that wrapped around the upper part of his body. Luckily, it stayed hidden under his shirt, invisible to the naked eye. On the first day of class, wouldn't you know it, he found himself assigned to the toughest, most unruly group of students in the entire school. The smart-mouthed troublemakers who had already heard through the grapevine that their new teacher used to be a Marine, eyed him warily, quietly plotting how far they could push him. He walked into the rowdy classroom without a hint of hesitation, strode over to the window and threw it wide open before taking his seat behind the desk. A moment later, a strong gust of wind blew through, flapping his tie wildly. Without so much as a flicker of expression, he calmly picked up a stapler off his desk and stapled the tie directly to his chest, 37 times. Dead silence fell over the classroom. The rest of the school year went very smoothly indeed. There was once an American lieutenant named Lieutenant Johnson, known far and wide among his friends for being remarkably, almost painfully, straightforward. As an example of just how blunt he could be, after spending the night with a woman, the following morning, as they were both getting dressed, she gently reminded him, "But, my dear Lieutenant, aren't you forgetting about payment?" He looked at her matter-of-factly and replied, "Lieutenants don't receive payments for this." On another occasion, he went to a fancy restaurant with a group of his more sophisticated friends. As the conversation turned to relationships and dating, one of his friends offered him some advice. Instead of his usual bluntness, he should try approaching a respectable lady with light, casual small talk, pets, the weather, music, that sort of thing. Taking this advice to heart, Lieutenant Johnson stepped out of the restaurant that very evening and spotted a lovely woman walking her dog down the sidewalk. He walked right up to her, kicked her dog up into the air, and said, "It's flying a little low. That's a sign of rain, by the way. I have a piano at home. Want a screw?" The woman, somewhat taken aback but clearly familiar with his type, replied evenly, "Instead of just saying, 'Want a screw,' try saying, 'Would you like to grab dinner and then screw with me?'" "Okay, I'll try that," said the lieutenant, adjusting his approach on the spot. "Would you like to grab dinner and then screw with me?" "Sure," she replied. "Cool," said Lieutenant Johnson, already turning to leave. "Let me know when you're done with dinner, and I'll pick you up."
As the family gathered around the table for a big dinner together, the youngest son cleared his throat and announced that he had just come from the Army recruiter's office and signed up. Audible gasps went around the table, quickly followed by laughter, as his older brothers openly voiced their disbelief that their little brother could possibly handle military life. "Oh, come on, quit joking," one of them snickered. "You didn't actually do that, did you?" "You'd never make it through basic training," another one scoffed. The new recruit looked around the table for some kind of support and finally turned to his mother, hoping for backup. But she just sat there, quietly studying him for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "Do you really plan to make your own bed every morning?" 51 years ago, Herman James, a mountain man from North Carolina, was drafted into the Army. On his very first day of basic training, the Army handed him a comb. That same afternoon, the Army barber sheared off every last bit of his hair. On his second day, the Army issued him a toothbrush. That afternoon, the Army dentist yanked out 7 of his teeth. On his third day, the Army issued him a jockstrap. The Army has been looking for Herman for 51 years.
2 military police officers were chasing down a fleeing draftee who had bolted from the base rather than report for duty. In a panic, the young man ran straight into the courtyard of a nearby convent. where he spotted a nun sitting quietly on a round bench beneath a tree, absorbed in a book. He rushed up to her, breathless, and begged, "Quick, sister, please hide me. I don't want to be drafted, and the military police are right behind me." Without a moment's hesitation, the nun lifted up her skirt and said, "Quick, hide under here." Moments later, the two officers came jogging up and asked the nun, out of breath, if she had seen a soldier run past. She calmly replied, "No." Once they had given up and moved on, she told the young man it was safe to come out. Grateful and a little flustered, he thanked her warmly, and without quite thinking it through, added, "You have a very nice set of legs for a nun." She smiled sweetly and said, "If you had reached up a little farther, you would have found a very nice set of balls, too. I'm not exactly eager to be drafted either."
An admiral who had lost one of his ears in an accident and who was deeply self-conscious about his appearance was interviewing 3 candidates for his personal staff: a Navy Master Chief, an Aviation Master Chief, and a Marine Sergeant Major. The first candidate, a Navy Master Chief of the Surface Fleet, had a great interview. Right at the end, the admiral casually asked him, "Do you notice anything different about me?" The Master Chief studied him for a moment and said, "Why, yes, Admiral. I couldn't help but notice you're missing your starboard ear. I imagine that must affect your hearing on that side." The Admiral, furious, threw him out of the office on the spot. The next candidate, an Aviation Master Chief, was asked the exact same question and answered just as bluntly, "Well, yes, sir, you seem to be short one ear." He too was thrown out. The third and final candidate was the Marine Sergeant Major, sharp, articulate, and clearly a cut above the other 2 combined. The Admiral wanted this one badly, but decided to ask him the same question anyway, just to be sure. "Do you notice anything different about me?" The Sergeant Major studied him for a moment and, to the Admiral's great relief, said, "Yes, sir, you wear contact lenses." Impressed and pleasantly surprised, the Admiral thought to himself what an incredibly tactful Marine he'd found. "And how would you know that?" he asked. The Sergeant Major replied, without a trace of a smile, "Well, sir, it's pretty hard to wear glasses with only one damn ear."
By the time a Marine finally pulled into a small town late one night, every single hotel room in the place was booked solid. "You've got to have a room somewhere," he pleaded with the front desk manager. "Even just a bed, I don't care where." The manager thought it over and said, "Well, I do have a double room with only one occupant, an Air Force guy. He might be willing to split the cost with you, but fair warning, he snores so loudly the guests in the rooms next to him have complained more than once. I'm not sure it'd be worth it." "No problem," the exhausted Marine said. "I'll take it." The next morning, the Marine came down to breakfast looking bright-eyed, well-rested, and thoroughly refreshed. "How'd you sleep?" the manager asked, surprised. "Never better," the Marine said with a satisfied grin. "No trouble with the snoring then?" the manager pressed. "Not at all. I shut him up pretty quick," the Marine said. Curious, the manager asked how on earth he'd managed that. "Well," the Marine explained, "when I walked in, he was already fast asleep, snoring away like a chainsaw. So I walked over, gave him a little kiss on the cheek, and said, 'Good night, beautiful.' He sat up wide awake the rest of the night, watching me." A respected captain in the Foreign Legion was transferred out to a remote and isolated desert outpost, far from anything resembling civilization. During his orientation tour of the base, he noticed a very old, weathered-looking camel tied up behind the enlisted men's barracks. Curious, he turned to the sergeant giving him the tour. "Why exactly is there a camel tied up back there?" The sergeant shrugged. "Well, sir, it's a long way from anywhere out here, and the men have natural urges.
So when those urges strike, they make use of the camel. The captain considered this for a moment and nodded. Well, if it's good for morale, I suppose it's all right. 6 long, lonely months passed at the outpost, and eventually the captain could no longer keep his own urges in check. One evening, he barked out to his sergeant, "Bring the camel to my tent." The sergeant, exchanging a glance with the other men nearby, shrugged and led the camel inside as ordered. A few minutes later, the captain emerged, fastening his trousers, practically beaming with pride. "So, Sergeant," he said, "is that how the enlisted men do it?" The sergeant looked at him evenly and replied, "Well, sir, usually they just use it to ride into town."
A squad of American soldiers was out on patrol along the Iraqi border when they came across a badly mangled dead body lying by the roadside. As they moved in closer to investigate, they realized it was an Iraqi soldier. A short distance further up the road, they found something even more urgent. A badly injured American soldier lying in a ditch on the opposite side, struggling to breathe. They rushed over, cradled his bruised head, and asked what on earth had happened to him. "Well," he whispered weakly, "I was walking down this road, armed to the teeth, when I came across this heavily armed Iraqi border guard. I looked him dead in the eye and shouted, 'Saddam Hussein is a moronic, deceitful, lying piece of trash!' He looked me right back in the eye and shouted, 'George W. Bush is a moronic, deceitful, lying piece of trash too!' We were standing there shaking hands," he said, "when the truck hit us."
A retired Army general moved into a new apartment after finally leaving the service behind him. Over the following weeks, his new neighbors began to notice a strange pattern. Every weekend, he'd come home around 2 in the morning, quite thoroughly drunk. Once inside, he'd sit on the edge of his bed, pull off his left boot, and drop it on the floor with a loud, echoing thud. Then, as if determined to outdo himself, he'd yank off his right boot and slam it down even harder, sending a thunderous bang rattling through the whole building. The poor neighbors, several of them with young children trying to sleep, kept getting jolted awake by the racket. Fed up, they eventually banded together and formed a small delegation to knock on the general's door one sunny morning. "Mr. General, sir," they began politely, "we want to start by thanking you for your dedicated service to our country, and we're honored to have you living among us." The general thanked them graciously, touched by the gesture. "But, sir," they continued, "we understand your years of service must have taken a real toll, and we just want you to enjoy a peaceful retirement. We were wondering, though, if you might refrain from slamming your boots on the floor in the middle of the night when you come home on weekends. It's been waking the whole building." The general, genuinely surprised and a little embarrassed, apologized at once and promised it wouldn't happen again. The following weekend, true to old habits, the general came home drunk once more. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he suddenly remembered the conversation with his neighbors. He pulled off his left boot and let it drop to the floor as usual, but as he held the right boot in his hand, a flicker of clarity cut through the haze. "Wait a minute," he muttered to himself. "This is what they were talking about, isn't it?" Determined to be considerate, he carefully set the right boot down beside the left one and climbed into bed. About an hour later, he was jolted awake by the doorbell ringing insistently, accompanied by frantic knocking. Groggy and confused, he opened the door to find his neighbors standing outside in their pajamas, looking utterly exhausted. "Sir, could you please just slam the other boot already so the rest of us can finally get some sleep?" During World War II, 4 paratroopers, one from England, one from Scotland, one from France, and one from the United States, found themselves crammed together on a plane, preparing to jump behind enemy lines. They were geared up and ready to do their duty,
But as the moment approached, they made a horrifying discovery. There was only one serviceable parachute left among them. The four men looked at each other in tense silence, none of them eager to volunteer as the one who jumped without a chute. Then, without a word of warning, the French paratrooper, who had been calmly sipping a glass of cognac in the corner, downed the rest of his drink in one gulp, shouted "Pour la France," and leapt straight out of the plane. No parachute at all. Not to be outdone, the American paratrooper quickly threw back a glass of bourbon, hollered "For freedom," and jumped out right after him, also without a parachute. Finally, the Scotsman, determined to prove his own courage and loyalty to his homeland, downed a glass of whiskey, declared "For Scotland," and threw the Englishman out of the plane.
A little boy was standing in front of a mirror in the restroom at John F. Kennedy Airport, admiring his reflection, when in walked a Marine Staff Sergeant, sharply dressed in his full dress blues. The little boy's eyes went wide. "Wow, are you a Marine?" "Why, yes, I am, young man," the Marine replied warmly. "Would you like to wear my hat?" "Boy, would I," the little boy said, practically vibrating with excitement. He took the hat, placed it carefully on his head, and turned to admire himself in the mirror. As he stood there posing, the door swung open again, and a ray of bright light spilled into the room as another man walked in. But this was no ordinary man. This was an airborne ranger, medals and all. The little boy turned and stared, then slowly approached him, catching his own reflection in the man's gleam. As traveled up to the soldier's chest, covered in medals and combat ribbons, and he found himself momentarily speechless. Finally, working up the courage, he took a deep breath and asked, "Excuse me, sir, are you an airborne ranger?" The ranger's voice boomed like thunder. "Why, yes, I am. Would you like to shine my boots?" The little boy shook his head quickly and smiled. "Oh, no, sir, I'm not a Marine. I'm just wearing his hat."
A general visited an army hospital to check on conditions and offer some much-needed encouragement to the wounded troops. It was the height of World War I. Trench warfare had turned into a living hell, and the men lying in those hospital beds could use all the inspiration they could get. The general made his way down the row of beds, starting with the first man. "What brings you in here, son?" he asked. "Sir, I got dysentery in the trenches, something awful," the soldier replied. "And how are they treating you in here?" the general asked. "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my behind with a soft brush." "Is there anything else we can do for you?" the general asked. "No, sir, the nurses are doing the best they can." Satisfied, the general thanked him for his service and moved on to the second bed. "What brings you in here, son?" he asked again. The soldier answered, a little embarrassed, "Sir, I caught gonorrhea from a woman while I was on leave." The general chuckled. "It happens to the best of us, son. How are they treating you in here?" "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my privates with a soft brush." "Anything else we can do for you?" "No, sir, the nurses are doing the best they can." Once again satisfied, the general thanked him and moved on to the third bed. "What brings you in here, son?" "Sir, I got strep throat in the trenches," the soldier replied. "How are they treating you in here?" "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my throat with a soft brush." "Is there anything else we can do for you?" The soldier hesitated for just a moment. "Actually, sir, there is one thing." He paused. "I'd like to be the first one to use the brush."
3 Army generals got into a heated argument one evening over whose soldiers were the bravest, and eventually decided to settle it with a demonstration. The first general called one of his men forward and pointed to a tall flagpole nearby. "You see that flagpole? Climb to the top and jump down." The soldier hesitated at first, but ultimately began climbing. When he reached the top, he jumped, and broke his leg on landing. The other two generals saluted the man, impressed by his bravery. The second general called his own soldier forward and pointed to the same flagpole. "Climb it and do a front flip on the way down." The soldier climbed obediently, executed the flip as ordered, and tragically broke his spine upon impact. Once again, the general saluted the soldier for his courage. Finally, it was the third general's turn. He called a soldier forward, handed him a backpack loaded down with bricks, and commanded, "Soldier, take this backpack, climb that flagpole, and perform a double backflip on the way down." The soldier looked at him, laughed out loud, and said, "Boss, screw you and your commands." The general folded his arms proudly across his chest and declared, "Gentlemen, this is what I call bravery."
A soldier showed up for military training one day, only to realize, to his horror, that he had forgotten to bring his gun. If you need to shoot someone, aim your stick at them and shout, "Bangity bang bang." If someone gets too close, poke them in the gut with it like a bayonet and shout, "Stabbity stab stab." Now get moving. The soldier thought the whole thing sounded utterly ridiculous. But to his surprise, when he aimed his stick across the field at a fellow trainee and hollered, "Bangity bang bang," the man dropped to the ground in a theatrical display. Encouraged, he tried it again when another trainee ran past, poking him in the ribs and shouting, "Stabbity stab stab," and that man too collapsed dramatically, playing dead. Emboldened, the soldier started charging across the mock battlefield, shouting his commands left and right, until eventually he realized to his own amazement that he was the last man standing. Just as he began to feel proud of himself, another soldier rounded the corner and started walking toward him, slowly, stiffly, and unmistakably menacingly. The soldier raised his stick and shouted, "Bangity bang bang!" But this time, nothing happened. The other soldier kept coming, arms rigid at his sides, boots stomping heavily into the dirt. Sweat beading on his forehead, the soldier cleared his throat, adjusted his grip, and tried again, louder this time. "Bangity bang bang!" Still nothing. The soldier kept marching closer. Panicking now, he pretended to reload his stick and cried out desperately, "Bangity bang bang! Bangity bang bang! Stabbity stab stab!" None of it worked. The approaching soldier finally reached him, kicked him hard in the shin, and knocked him flat onto the ground. Standing over him, he looked down and said calmly, "Tankety tank tank."
3 soldiers were up for discharge after long years of service, and it came time to sort out their pensions. The clerk handling the paperwork announced they'd be trying something new. "I want each of you to measure a part of your body. We'll multiply that number by 1,000, and that's what you'll get in dollars." The first soldier stepped up confidently. "Measure my height," he said. He came out to 72 inches. The clerk nodded approvingly. "Not bad, that's 72 grand." The second soldier thought it over for a moment before saying, "Measure my arms, fingertip to fingertip, going all the way around my chest once." The clerk was impressed. "That comes out to 120 inches, so you get $120,000. Finally, the third soldier, a crusty old sergeant major, stepped forward. "Measure my manhood," he said flatly. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that? Even if you're well endowed, how long could it possibly be?" The sergeant major was adamant, so the clerk sighed and called in a doctor with a tape measure, explaining that the measurement would run from the tip of the penis to the back of the testicles. The doctor got to work, placing one end of the tip, and then suddenly exclaimed, "Clerk, this man has no balls." The sergeant major nodded calmly. "That's right. I left my balls in Vietnam."
It was dawn on the battlefield along the border between England and Scotland.
Both armies stood facing each other across a wooded valley, and this was the day it would finally be settled. The morning was eerily quiet when out of the mist-shrouded woods a booming Scottish voice rang out. "A Scotsman can beat any Englishman." The English king, deeply affronted, ordered his best soldiers sent into the woods to teach the upstart Scotsman a lesson. The man marched in, and soon the unmistakable sounds of battle echoed through the still morning air. Then, just as suddenly, everything went quiet. The silence was broken again by the same booming Scottish voice. "A Scotchman can beat any two Englishmen." By this point, it had become a matter of pride, so the English king sent in 2 of his finest men. The fighting resumed, then fell silent once more, followed by the voice again, this time declaring, "A Scotsman can beat any 4 Englishmen." This pattern repeated itself for some time, the numbers doubling with each round, until finally the voice boomed out, "A Scotsman can beat 100 Englishmen." So 100 men marched down into the valley together. The battle that followed raged on far longer than any before it, tension mounting on both hilltops as the fighting dragged on. At last, a single mortally wounded English soldier crawled out of the mist, and with his final breath gasped, "Don't send any more. It's a trap. There are 2 of them."
A watch officer was making his rounds through the cafeteria when one of the new recruits loudly complained that the food wasn't fit for a dog. Determined to prove the recruit wrong, the officer marched off, found a stray dog nearby, and placed a bowl of the disputed food down in front of it. The dog ate the whole thing without hesitation. "There you go," the officer said, satisfied. "So what exactly were you complaining about? It's clearly fit for a dog to eat." Not willing to concede defeat, the recruit thought for a second and shot back, "Yeah, but he now licks his arse to get the flavor out." 2 new Army paratrooper recruits were sitting around talking about their first ever jump out of a plane. The first soldier turned to the second and asked, "So how'd the jump go today?" The second soldier let out a breath. "Well, we were up there with the door open, and I could see the earth speeding by thousands of feet below me. I looked at the jump master and told him I just couldn't do it. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, 'If you don't jump out of this plane, I'm going to stick my boot directly up your ass.'" The first soldier leaned in. "Well, did you jump?" The second soldier nodded slowly. "Yeah, a little at first." A Marine, an Army grunt, and an airman are having a beer, and the Army grunt is telling this story about how one time he found a scorpion in his tent. Marine asks, "What would you do?" And the grunt says he crushed it with his boot and flung it out the flap. The Marine laughs and says, "What a sissy." The grunt asks, "Well, what would you do then?" Marine replies, "When a scorpion gets in my tent, I usually cut off its tail while it's still alive. Keep it as a pet for a few days. Might prank my senior officer with it. Then, eventually, I cook it and eat it." The grunt feels a little embarrassed, then shifts focus to the airman and asks, "What would you do?" The airman says, "I'd call the front desk and ask them why there's a tent in my room." An old Wild West fort was about to come under attack, and the aging general in command sent for his trusted Native American scout. You must use all 30 years of your skill to estimate the sort of army we're up against here. The scout knelt down, pressed his ear to the ground, and listened intently. "Large war party," he reported. "Maybe 300 braves, 4 chiefs, 2 on black stallions, 2 on white stallions, all wearing war paint. Many, many guns. Medicine men are with them too." Good grief, the general exclaimed. You can tell all of that just by listening to the ground? No, the scout replied. I can see under the gate. A mother was visiting her son on an army base one afternoon and struck up a conversation with one of his colleagues. What rank are you? She asked. I'm relieved to say I've just been promoted from captain to major, he told her, beaming. Why relieved? She asked, curious. Because, he replied with a grin, my last name is Hook. The reason the Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marines bicker among themselves is that they don't speak the same language. For instance, take the simple phrase, secure the building. The Army would post guards around the place. The Navy would turn out the lights and lock the doors. The Marines would kill everyone inside and set up headquarters. The Air Force would take out a 5-year lease with an option to buy.
Two Army boys, Leroy and Jasper, from the hills of Kentucky, were promoted right from privates to sergeants because of their great marksmanship with rifles. Not long after, they're out for a walk, and Leroy says, "Hey, Jasper, there's the NCO club. Let's you and me stop in." "But we're privates," protests Jasper. "We're sergeants now," says Leroy, pulling him inside. "Now, Jasper, I'm gonna sit down and have me a drink." "But we're privates," says Jasper. "Are you blind, boy?" asked Leroy, pointing at his stripes. "We're sergeants now, so hush your mouth." So they have their drinks, and pretty soon a hooker comes up to Leroy. "You're cute," she says, "and I'd like to date you, but I've got a bad case of gonorrhea." Leroy pulls his friend to the side and whispers, "Jasper, go look in the dictionary and see what gonorrhea means. If it's okay, give me the okay sign." So Jasper goes to look it up, comes back, and gives Leroy the big okay sign. 3 weeks later, Leroy is laid up in the infirmary with a terrible case of gonorrhea. "Jasper," he says, "why did you give me the okay sign?" "Well, Leroy, in the dictionary it says gonorrhea affects only the privates." He points to his stripes. "But we're sergeants now."
3 friends, a turtle, a mole, and a bear, are drafted and have to join the army. But neither of them want to go, so they need to provide medical proof why they can't join. "It's easy for me," says the turtle. "I am slow." He enters the examination room, and when he comes out, he happily tells his friend that he is in fact too slow. "Well," says the mole next, "I am literally blind. How would they want me?" And he's right. He comes out a few minutes later and hugs his friends that he doesn't have to join the army because they don't need a blind mole. "Okay, guys," says the bear, terrified. "Let's face it, I am one of the biggest and most dangerous animals. I am the perfect soldier." "I have an idea," says the turtle slowly. "The most dangerous part of you are your teeth. Without your teeth, you are not really dangerous. So if we just smash your teeth, they won't want you." Reluctantly, the bear agrees, and the 3 friends start smashing the bear's teeth. Without teeth, the bear enters the examination room, and after 10 minutes comes out again with a hanging head and sad face. "So, you have to join army?" the turtle asks carefully. The bear mumbles, "No, I'm too fat."
A sergeant in the army is out fishing with a Navy sailor. A big gust of wind hits their small boat, and it capsizes. The sergeant starts to swim to shore, but he notices his friend is sinking and panicking in the water, so swims back and pulls him to safety. "Please don't tell anyone about this," the sailor says. "If people found out I can't swim, I'd be the laughingstock of the Navy." "I understand," says the sergeant. "My men would be devastated if they found out I can't walk on water."
Back in the early 1930s, There was an RAF station in East Africa whose station commander had somehow acquired a very elderly lion. The poor old thing was nearly blind, had hardly a tooth left in its head, and wasn't exactly what you'd call a fearsome predator anymore. The commander named him Clarence, and with a bit of care and gentle handling, Clarence became surprisingly friendly. Before long, he was practically a pet, and everyone on the squadron was used to having him around. One morning, a newly arrived pilot was heading out for a training exercise when he noticed something lying right in the middle of the runway. As he got closer, he realized it was Clarence, stretched out in the sun and completely fast asleep. The pilot tried blipping the throttle a few times to wake him up. Clarence didn't move. So the pilot shut down, climbed out, and jogged over to the lion. "Get out of the way." He gave Clarence a gentle nudge with the toe of his freshly polished uniform shoe. Clarence slowly opened one eye and gave the pilot an extremely offended look. Then, with all the enthusiasm of a lion who had been rudely interrupted from his morning nap, he lumbered to his feet and slowly disappeared into the long grass. The pilot finally got airborne and spent the next half hour doing his exercises. When he returned to the station, he picked up the nearest telephone and called the CO's office. "Sir," he complained, "I wish you'd keep that lion of yours under control. I had to chase him off the runway before I could take off this morning." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then the CO replied, completely bewildered. "What the hell are you talking about? Clarence has been asleep under my desk all morning."
During the war, an English prisoner of war was being held by the Germans. The poor Englishman had been shot and wounded in several places, but somehow he was still hanging in there. Then one day, a German doctor came to examine him and delivered some bad news. "Englander, your arm is infected with gangrene. We must cut it off." The Englishman thought about it for a moment and then shrugged. "Well, all right. But when your planes go bombing England, could you drop the arm over there?" The German agreed. "Yeah, that will not be a problem." A few weeks later, the German returned with more bad news. "Englander, we must cut off your other arm." The Englishman sighed. "Well, could you drop that one over England too, like you did with the first one?" "Yeah," the German replied. "That will be done." A few days later, the German came back again. "Englander, I'm afraid we have to cut off your leg." The Englishman nodded. "Well, could you do the same with that one? Drop it over England?" The German agreed. "Okay." The next day, the German arrived looking rather annoyed. "Englander, we must cut off your other leg." The Englishman sighed and started to speak. "Well, could you just—" "No!" the German snapped. The Englishman looked surprised. The German pointed at him angrily. "We think you are trying to escape."
An elderly Canadian gentleman of 83 arrived in Paris by plane. At the French customs desk, the man took a few minutes to locate his passport in his carry-on bag. "You have been to France before, monsieur?" the customs officer asked, sarcastically. The elderly gentleman admitted he had been to France previously. "Then you should know enough to have your passport ready," the Canadian said. "The last time I was here, I didn't have to show it." "Impossible! Canadians always have to show your passports on arrival in France." The Canadian senior gave the Frenchman a long, hard look. Then he quietly explained. "Well, when I came ashore at Juno Beach on D-Day in 1944 to help liberate this country, I couldn't find a single Frenchman to show it to."
So, one afternoon, 3 old veterans are sitting around at the VFW Hall, swapping stories about their families and, naturally, bragging about the heroic things their ancestors had done. The first veteran proudly tells the others, My great-grandfather, when he was just 13 years old, was a drummer boy at Shiloh. The other two are impressed. Then the second veteran joins in. Well, my great-grandfather went down with Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. The first two nod, clearly trying to outdo each other. The third veteran sits there listening to all this and finally says, "Well, I'm the only soldier in my family, but if my great-grandfather were still alive today, he'd be the most famous man in the world." The other two veterans look at him. "Really?" one of them asks. "What did he do?" The third veteran shakes his head. "Nothing much." His friends are confused. Then why would he be the most famous man in the world? The old veteran looks at them and says, "Because he'd be 165 years old."
An Israeli soldier who just enlisted asked the commanding officer for a 3-day pass. The CO says, "Are you crazy? You just joined the Israeli army and you already want a 3-day pass? You must do something spectacular for that recognition." So the soldier comes back a day later in an Arab tank. The CO was so impressed, he asked, "How did you do it?" "Well, I jumped in a tank and went toward the border with the Arabs. I approached the border and saw an Arab tank. I put my white flag up. The Arab tank put his white flag up. I said to the Arab soldier, 'Do you want to get a 3-day pass?' So we exchanged tanks." A general noticed one of his soldiers was behaving oddly. The soldier would pick up any piece of paper he found, frown, and say, "That's not it," and put it down again. This went on for some time, with calls of "That's not it" sounding outside, until the general arranged to have the soldier psychologically tested. The psychologist concluded that the soldier was deranged and wrote out his discharge from the army. The soldier picked it up, smiled, and said, "That's it."
You may have heard of the best-kept secret of the U.S. Army, the infamous Area 51 in Nevada, where secret operations are conducted. It was late afternoon when Air Force spotted a Cessna airplane landing right at Area 51. Perplexed, they immediately seized the pilot and dragged him into an interrogation room. The pilot's story was that he took off from Vegas, got lost, and spotted the base just as he was about to run out of fuel. The Air Force started a full FBI background check on the pilot and held him overnight during the investigation. By the next day, they were finally convinced that the pilot really was lost and wasn't a spy. They gassed up his airplane, gave him a terrifying "you did not see a base" briefing, complete with threats of spending the rest of his life in prison, told him Vegas was that away on such and such a heading, and sent him on his way. The day after that, though, to the total disbelief of the Air Force, the same Cessna showed up again. Once again, the MPs surrounded the plane. Only this time, there were 2 people in the plane, the pilot and a sour, angry-looking woman. The same pilot jumped out and said, "I know I shouldn't be here again, and you can do anything you want to me, but please, please, will you tell my wife that I actually did spend last night in Area 51? So, this sergeant gets back to the military base after a weekend vacation, and when he arrives, he expects all his soldiers to be there waiting for him. But nobody's there. 1 hour goes by, then 2 hours, and it takes a full 3 hours before the soldiers finally start showing up. By this point, the sergeant is absolutely furious. So he decides he's going to call every single late soldier into his office and make them explain themselves. The first soldier comes in. The sergeant looks at him and says, "All right, soldier, let's hear it. What's your excuse for being 3 hours late?" The soldier looks nervous and says, "Sorry, sir, I can explain. I was late for the bus, so I had to hitchhike, but nobody would stop for me. Then suddenly, an old man driving a horse and buggy pulled over and offered me a ride. The sergeant looks at him like he's not quite sure he heard that correctly. A horse and buggy? Yes, sir. I couldn't refuse the man's kindness, so I got in. Unfortunately, it took forever to get here because the horse was so slow. The sergeant sighs. Well, I suppose that's a reasonable explanation. You're dismissed. The soldier salutes and leaves. Then the second soldier walks in. The sergeant is already expecting another ridiculous story. So, what's your excuse? The soldier says, "Sorry, sir, I was late for the bus, so I had to hitchhike. Nobody would stop, but eventually an old woman driving a horse and carriage offered me a ride." The sergeant raises an eyebrow. Horse and carriage? Yes, sir. And I suppose that was slow too? Very slow, sir. The sergeant shakes his head. All right, get out of here. The soldier leaves. Then the third soldier comes in. And wouldn't you know it, he's got exactly the same story. Late for the bus, had to hitchhike, nobody would stop. Eventually, someone with a horse and buggy gave him a ride. And of course, the horse was incredibly slow. Then the fourth soldier comes in. Same story. Then the fifth. Same story. Pretty soon, the sergeant has heard so many stories about horse-drawn vehicles that he's starting to wonder if the entire military base has suddenly been transported back 100 years. Finally, the last soldier walks in. The sergeant is completely fed up by this point. He leans back in his chair and says sarcastically, "Let me guess, you were late for the bus too?" "Yes, sir." "And then you had to hitchhike?" "Yes, sir." "And someone stopped and gave you a ride?" "Yes, sir." The sergeant rolls his eyes. "And I suppose it was another horse and buggy?" "No, sir." The sergeant looks up. "No?" "No, sir. I got a ride in a 2014 Mercedes." Now the sergeant is genuinely confused. A Mercedes? Then why the hell were you late? The soldier looks apologetic. "Well, we tried to make good time, sir." The sergeant waits for the explanation. The soldier finally says, "But the road was completely blocked with horses and buggies."
The captain called the sergeant in. "Sarge, I just got a telegram that Smith's mother died yesterday. Better go tell him and send him in to see me." So the sergeant calls for his morning formation and lines up all the troops. "Listen up, men," says the sergeant. "Johnson, report to personnel to sign some papers. The rest of you men report to the motor pool for maintenance. Oh, by the way, Smith, your mother died. Report to the commander."
Later that day, the captain called the sergeant into his office. "Hey, Sarge, that was a pretty cold way to inform Smith his mother died. Couldn't you be a bit more tactful next time?" "Yes, sir," answered the Sarge. A few months later, the captain called the sergeant in again with, "Sarge, I just got a telegram that James' mother died. You'd better go tell him and send him in to see me. This time, be more tactful." So the sergeant calls for his morning formation. "Okay, men, fall in and listen up. Everybody with a mother take 2 steps forward. Not so fast, James."
A soldier, a sailor, and an airman were sitting together having a beer, and they begin to discuss the greatest technological inventions of the modern world. "It is the laser," said the soldier, a man of obvious superior intellect. "The laser, because with it you can determine the precise range to an enemy target. You can use it to gather important telemetry information, and you can even use it for photography that is almost tri-dimensional." "No," interjected the sailor, also an intelligent person, but obviously standing in the shadow of the soldier's phenomenal mind. "It is the radar. With a radar, you can track incoming aircraft and missiles. You can determine the speed of the particular vehicles that are approaching your ship, and if you use it right, you can even heat your lunch." "I disagree," said the airman. "A man of, well, he's an airman, and all airmen are born out of a diminishing gene pool. The greatest invention is the thermos." "The thermos?" exclaimed the other two. "Yep, a thermos," he said. "I mean, just think about it. If you want something hot, you put hot stuff in it. If you want cold, you put cold stuff in it. Yeah, so, quizzed the other two. Well, said the airman, how does it know?
3 high-ranking Axis soldiers are about to be interrogated during World War II. One is a member of the Gestapo, one is an Imperial Japanese officer, and one is a fascist Italian commander. They are all sitting in their holding cell discussing what they are going to do when they get interrogated. The German says, "My superior German spirit and intelligence will make it impossible for them to break me." The Japanese says, "It is only through my undying devotion to the Emperor that I will be able to withstand their torture." The Italian says, "I've had it." The German is the first to be interrogated, and as he leaves, they wish him luck. Nearly a whole day passes before the German returns to the cell, covered in bruises and blood. The other two ask him what happened. "Even my perfect genes could not protect me from their methods. I have failed my country." Next, the Japanese is up to be interrogated. 3 days pass and he returns to the cell. His eyes are both black, fingers broken, and body bruised and bloodied. "I have dishonored myself and my emperor. When they release me, I must commit honorable seppuku." Lastly, the Italian is up, and he leaves already begging for his life. A whole week passes before he returns. Beaten nearly to death, he is carried in by 2 soldiers. One of the soldiers jeers, "I can't believe you guys broke instead of this Dago. He's a real man, not like you girls." The other 2 are shocked and amazed that this Italian could take their punishments and not break. They ask him how he did it. He didn't strike them as so formidable. "I wanted to give in immediately, but I couldn't speak." "What do you mean you couldn't speak?" the others ask. "The bastards tied my hands behind my back."
A visitor returning to Kuwait for the first time since the Gulf War was impressed by a sociological change. On previous visits, she noted that women customarily walked about 5 paces behind their husbands. She observed that the men now walked over 20 paces behind their wives. She approached one of the women for an explanation. What enabled women here to achieve this marvelous reversal of roles? "Landmines," replied the Kuwaiti woman. A sergeant was addressing a squad of 25 and said, "I have a nice, easy job for the laziest man here. Put up your hand if you are the laziest." 24 men raised their hands, and the sergeant asked the other man, "Why didn't you raise your hand?" The man replied, "Too much trouble raising the hand, Sarge." General Baldwin had barely arrived in the forward area when a sniper's bullet removed a button from his shirt. He threw himself to the ground in terror. The men stood around with the greatest unconcern. The general yelled at a passing sergeant, "Hey, isn't somebody going to kill that damned sniper?" The sergeant looked down at the general and replied, "I guess not, General. We're scared that if we kill him, the enemy will replace him with somebody who really knows how to shoot."
2 Marines boarded a quick shuttle flight out of Dallas, headed for Houston. One sat in the window seat, the other sat in the middle seat. Just before takeoff, an Army soldier got on and took the aisle seat next to the 2 Marines. The soldier kicked off his shoes, wiggled his toes, and was settling in when the Marine in the window seat said, "I think I'll get up and get a Coke." "No problem," said the soldier. "I'll get it for you." While he was gone, the Marine picked up the soldier's shoe and spit in it. When the soldier returned with the Coke, the Marine in the middle seat said, "That looks good. I think I'll have one too." Again, the soldier obligingly went to fetch it, and while he was gone, the Marine picked up the soldier's other shoe and spit in it. The soldier returned, and they all sat back and enjoyed the rest of the short flight to Houston. As the plane was landing, the soldier slipped his feet into his shoes and knew immediately what had happened. "How long must this go on?" the soldier asked. "This fighting between our services, this hatred, this animosity, this spitting in shoes and peeing in cokes."
A drill sergeant had just chewed out one of his cadets, and as he was walking away, he turned to the cadet and said, "I guess when I die, you'll come and dance on my grave." The cadet replied, "Not me, Sarge, not at all, sir. I promised myself that when I got out of the army, I'd never stand in another line." So Donald Rumsfeld is briefing George Bush in the Oval Office. Oh, and finally, sir, 3 Brazilian soldiers were killed in Iraq today. Bush goes pale, his jaw hanging open in stunned disbelief. He buries his face in his hands, muttering, "My God! My God!" "Mr. President," says Cheney, "we lose soldiers all the time, and it's terrible. But I've never seen you so upset. What's the matter?" Bush looks up and says, "How many is a Brazilian?" A young officer is working late at the Pentagon one evening. As he comes out of his office about 8 p.m., he sees the general standing by the classified document shredder in the hallway, a piece of paper in his hand. "Do you know how to work this thing?" the general asks. "My secretary's gone home, and I don't know how to run it." "Yes, sir," says the young officer, who turns on the machine, takes the paper from the general, and feeds it in. "Now," says the general, "I just need 1 copy."
A new soldier was on sentry duty at the main gate. His orders were clear. No car was to enter unless it had a special sticker on the windshield. A big army car came up with a general seated in the back. The sentry said, "Halt! Who goes there?" The chauffeur, a corporal, says, "General Wheeler." "I'm sorry, I can't let you through. You've got to have a sticker on the windshield." The general said, "Drive on." The sentry said, "Hold it, you really can't come through. I have orders to shoot if you try driving in without a sticker." The general repeated, "I'm telling you, son, drive on." The sentry walked up to the rear window and said, "General, I'm new at this. Do I shoot you or the driver?"
Recruits got a shock when their Army basic training instructor turned out to be an attractive female sergeant. Her assistant, however, was a burly, hawk-nosed veteran whose glare could freeze water. At the end of training, the attractive instructor congratulated the recruits and said that if there was anything she could do for us, just ask. From the back, a voice called out, "How about a kiss from the sergeant?" "Sure," she replied, raising her hand to quell the laughter. "But I'll let my assistant take care of it." During training exercises, the lieutenant, who was driving down a muddy back road, encountered another jeep stuck in the mud with a red-faced colonel at the wheel. "Your jeep stuck, sir?" asked the lieutenant as he pulled alongside. "Nope," replied the colonel, coming over and handing him the keys. "Yours is." 2 generals were preparing for battle. The first general calls his aide and says, "Bring me my red uniform." The other general asks why he would wear a red uniform. The first general explains that if he gets wounded, then his soldiers won't see the blood and lose their courage. The other general thinks about this, then calls to his aide, "Bring me my brown uniform."